My name is Eleanor Voss. I am 71 years old, and 11 days ago, a case manager stood at the foot of my hospital bed and told my son and his wife that I was not, in her words, a good return on an expensive treatment. They agreed with her. They didn't know I was listening. They didn't know the sedative had worn off 40 minutes early. And they certainly didn't know that the clinic they were standing in, the one whose billing codes and treatment algorithms were about to decide whether I lived or spent my last years in a rented hospice bed, had my name on the founding deed. Not Eleanor Voss. My maiden name. The name on the paperwork nobody in that room had ever bothered to read. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and this story deserves to be told properly, from the beginning, because the worst part wasn't what the nurse said. The worst part was how quickly my family said yes. I should tell you what I actually do, because it matters for everything that comes after. In 1988, I was a 33-year-old nurse with a folder of spreadsheets, a husband named Walter who believed in me more than I believed in myself, and a 4-bed clinic in a strip mall that everyone told me would fail within a year. It didn't fail. 40 years later, that 4-bed clinic is Meridian Health, 11 facilities across 3 counties, a cardiac center, an oncology wing, and roughly 2,000 employees who have never once met the woman who founded it, because I stopped doing ribbon cuttings a long time ago. I sold 60% of Meridian to a private equity group 9 years back, after Walter passed. I kept a board seat. I kept my quiet 40%, held through a trust with my maiden name on it, Eleanor Reyes, not Eleanor Voss, because I learned early that when people know you own the building, they stop talking to you like a person and start talking to you like a liability waiver. I wanted, in my last years, to occasionally be spoken to like a human being. So I built myself a small, deliberate wall of anonymity, and I kept it up even with my own son. Bradley is 51 now. Good heart, weak spine, that's the kindest and most accurate way I can put it. He doesn't cause harm on purpose. He just has never, in his entire life, said no to his wife in front of another person. Vanessa I married into, and Vanessa I have never fully understood. She grew up with less than she wanted and has spent every year since making sure she'll never go back to it. She doesn't see herself as greedy. She sees herself as responsible. Someone has to think about the future, she likes to say, usually right before asking about mine. They have a son, Caleb, 22, in his second year of nursing school, doing clinical rotations at, of all places, Meridian Cardiac. Caleb is the reason any of what follows was survivable. 6 weeks before the day in the hospital room, I fainted in my kitchen reaching for a mixing bowl. Aortic stenosis, advanced. The valve in my heart had narrowed to the width of a coffee stirrer, and the cardiologist, a good, blunt man named Dr. Marco Reyes, no relation, just a strange coincidence I noticed and said nothing about, told me I needed a transcatheter valve replacement within 2 months or I would not see another Christmas. The procedure runs just under $200,000 before insurance. My insurance, the modest retiree plan I've kept for optics for 9 years, would cover perhaps 60% of it, if a case manager signed off on medical necessity at my age. I checked in under Eleanor Reyes. I always do. Nobody at admissions blinked. And that one small, habitual act of privacy is what let me hear, word for word, exactly what my family thought I was worth. The case manager's name was Whitney Pierce. Late 30s, clipboard voice, the specific tired competence of someone who has said the same 60-second speech to 40 different families this month. I want to be fair to Whitney, because the story is more true if I am. She was not cruel. She was doing a job that hospital administration had quietly reshaped over the last 2 years, cost per outcome scoring, a spreadsheet that weighs age, projected quality-adjusted life years, and insurance reimbursement odds, and spits out a color. Green, proceed. Yellow, discuss. Red, redirect to comfort care. I was yellow going on red. A 71-year-old widow on a modest plan, no immediate family present who'd raised objections, no advance directive on file insisting on aggressive intervention. She came to speak with Bradley and Vanessa in the family lounge outside my room, believing, because I'd been sedated for a scan 2 hours earlier, that I was still asleep. I woke up at 2:47 in the afternoon. I remember the clock because it was directly in my eye line, and because I would end up staring at it for a very long time. I want to walk you through this honestly, Whitney said, because I think you deserve honesty more than false hope. The valve replacement has real risks at her age. Recovery would be long. Even with a good outcome, we're talking about maybe 3 to 5 additional years, and there's meaningful chance of complication. Financially, with her coverage, you'd likely be looking at $40,000 to $60,000 out of pocket. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you what the numbers say. Vanessa's voice, when it came, was soft in a way I hadn't heard from her in years. Soft like a door closing carefully so it doesn't wake the house. What would comfort care look like instead? If you have ever lain still and quiet while people 2 rooms away decided your worth in dollars, type "I hear you" in the comments right now. I promise you, by the end of this, you'll understand exactly why I didn't move. Bradley didn't say anything for 11 seconds. I counted. Then he said, "We just want her comfortable. We don't want her to suffer through some surgery for a few extra years if it's not going to be quality time anyway." Nobody in that room asked what I wanted. Nobody in that room had asked, in the 6 weeks since my diagnosis, whether I wanted to fight for the surgery or whether I'd rather let it go quietly. They had simply arrived at an answer, in a lounge with bad coffee, guided by a stranger with a clipboard and a color-coded spreadsheet, and the answer had taken them 4 minutes to reach. I lay there with my eyes closed and did the only thing I know how to do when the ground moves. I started keeping a list. I want to tell you that I sat up right then, ripped out my 4, and announced who I was. That's not what happened, and if you've lived 71 years, you know why. Anger that arrives fast leaves fast, and it rarely leaves proof behind. I have built 4 decades of a company on the principle that facts outlast feelings. So I closed my eyes, and I listened, and I began building a file. The first layer was simple and ugly: money. 2 days later, Caleb visited on his lunch break from rotations, still in scrubs, and sat with me while I pretended to nap. He didn't know I was awake. He was scrolling his phone, and his phone buzzed, and he laughed under his breath at something and murmured, "Mom's already got a realtor lined up for Grandma's house. She's fast." I opened my eyes. "A realtor," I said. Caleb went the color of hospital bedsheets. "Grandma. You're awake." "I've been awake for 2 days, sweetheart." "Tell me about the realtor." He didn't want to. Bless him, he tried to walk it back, tried to say it was just Vanessa being prepared, but Caleb has never been able to lie to me since he was 6 years old and blamed the dog for eating a cupcake the dog does not eat. By the time he left that afternoon, I knew this: Vanessa had contacted a realtor 19 days after my diagnosis, 19 days, before a single conversation had happened with me about what I wanted, to get a no-obligation valuation on my house. My house, the one Walter and I paid off in 14 years of Tuesday night second jobs. That was layer 1. Layer 2 came from Sandra. Sandra Kessler has been my attorney and, more honestly, my closest friend since 1994. I called her from the hospital bathroom, for pull and all, and asked her to quietly pull whatever public financial records existed on Bradley and Vanessa. Not to punish them. To understand them. A person's spending tells you what they actually believe about their own future, whether they'd admit it aloud or not. Sandra called back 48 hours later with a short, precise list, and I want to read it to you the way she read it to me, because the numbers matter more than the adjectives. 2 SUV leases, refinanced 8 months ago, $1,400 a month combined. A home equity line drawn down $11,000 in the last quarter for what the paperwork called renovation, though Caleb told me later it paid for Vanessa's sister's destination wedding. Private school tuition for their younger daughter, my granddaughter Ivy, $6,000 a semester, current, not behind. I want to be fair, they were keeping up. And underneath all of it, a maxed home equity line with one clean, cold entry from 6 weeks ago, a consultation fee, $400, paid to an estate planning attorney. 6 weeks ago. the week after my diagnosis. They hadn't planned my death. I want to be careful here, because this is the part where these stories usually turn people into villains, and Bradley and Vanessa are not villains. They are two people, stretched thin by choices they made when they believed there would always be more time to fix them, who were handed a spreadsheet by a stranger that gave them permission to stop paying for uncertainty. Vanessa grew up watching her own mother go bankrupt, nursing a father who never woke up from his own decline, for years of hospital bills that ate the house, the car, the college fund. She was not being cruel. She was being 20 years too late to a fear that never left her. That doesn't make it right. It makes it human, which is worse, in a way, because you can't just be angry at a monster. You have to sit with the fact that ordinary, tired, frightened people did this. Layer 3 took longer, and it was the layer that actually frightened me. I asked Sandra to quietly review Whitney Pierce's cost per outcome protocol, the spreadsheet, the color codes, because something about the speed of that yellow going on red assessment bothered me on a level deeper than my own case. It took her 10 days, 3 formal records requests filed as a board member's proxy, and 1 very uncomfortable lunch with a Meridian compliance officer to get the full picture. The protocol wasn't written maliciously. It was written 18 months ago by a cost-efficiency consultant the private equity group had brought in, designed, on paper, to standardize shared decision-making conversations for families facing high-cost, uncertain benefit procedures. In practice, over those 18 months, it had quietly recommended comfort care redirection for patients over 70 at a rate 11 points higher than the clinical outcomes data justified. 11 points. Real people. Real families in lounges with bad coffee, being told what the numbers said, when the numbers had been built to say it. If you've ever been treated like a line item instead of a person, by a company, a family member, anyone who decided your value on your behalf, write I see it below, because we're about to walk into that conference room together. I had my file. A leather portfolio, navy, the same one I've carried into every Meridian board meeting since 1988, the one Walter gave me the year we opened, worn soft at the corners now. Inside it, the founding deed under Eleanor Reyes. The trust documents proving my 40%. Sandra's financial summary on Bradley and Vanessa, not to shame them, but to understand them, and to make sure I couldn't be gaslit later into believing I'd imagined any of it. And the outcome data on Whitney's protocol, 11 points of quiet, misplaced arithmetic. 3 tabs. That's all it would take. I called Dr. Reyes first, not as a patient, but as a board member. I asked him one direct question: medically, stripped of cost, stripped of age, was I a good candidate for the valve replacement? He didn't hesitate. Excellent candidate, he said. Strong heart muscle otherwise, no diabetes, no prior cardiac events, the kind of patient he'd operate on without a second thought if the conversation in that lounge had never happened. I scheduled a routine board compliance review through Sandra's office, requesting the hospital's care coordination team present a case study on the cost efficiency protocol, completely standard, the kind of meeting Meridian holds 4 times a year, the kind Whitney Pierce would be asked to attend because her department's numbers were on the agenda. I did not tell them the patient in the case study was me. I sat with the portfolio on my lap the morning of the meeting and, for about 90 seconds, I almost called the whole thing off. Not out of mercy for Whitney, out of something smaller and more embarrassing. I thought about Bradley as a boy, maybe 8 years old, bringing me dandelions he was certain were flowers I'd never seen before. I thought, what if I do this and he never brings me anything again? Then I thought about the clock in that lounge. 2:47 in the afternoon. And I put on my reading glasses, Walter's habit, actually, not mine. I started wearing them the year he died, because it felt like carrying a piece of how carefully he used to look at things, and I walked in. The conference room on the 3rd floor of Meridian Cardiac has a long table, 11 chairs, and a view of the parking lot. Bradley and Vanessa were there because I had personally asked them to attend, as family, I said, present for final treatment planning. Whitney Pierce sat across from her department director. Dr. Reyes sat beside an empty chair that everyone assumed was for a hospital administrator. I sat in it. Vanessa saw me first, in my cardigan, reading glasses, portfolio on the table, and her face did something complicated, confusion, then a flicker of relief that I looked well, then a second flicker of something else entirely when she noticed the Meridian Health seal embossed on the folder's corner. "Mom, what is this?" Bradley asked. "This," I said, "is the compliance review your case manager's department requested I sit in on. I'm on the board. I have been for 9 years. I let that sit for exactly as long as the room needed to understand it wasn't a joke. You may know me better as Eleanor Reyes. It's the name on the deed." Whitney's clipboard went very still in her hands. "I want you to understand something about how I chose to do the next part. I did not raise my voice. I did not once, in the 40 minutes that followed, say a cruel word to anyone in that room. I have run companies long enough to know that the coldest, most effective sentence you can ever say is simply the truth, delivered slowly, with a pause after it. 11 days ago, I said, in the family lounge outside room 412, a case manager told my son and his wife that I was, and I'm quoting directly, not a good return on an expensive treatment. They agreed. I was awake for that conversation. I have been awake, functionally, for the 11 days since. Tab 1. I opened the portfolio and set Dr. Reyes's written clinical assessment on the table, sliding it toward Whitney's director. This patient, that is, me, was scored yellow going on red for surgical candidacy. Dr. Reyes's own notes, taken this same week, call her an excellent candidate. Strong heart. No comorbidities. The kind of case that should never have reached a comfort care conversation at all. Tab 2. This is an outcomes analysis of the cost-efficiency protocol implemented 18 months ago. Patients over 70 have been redirected toward comfort care at a rate 11 percentage points above what clinical data supports. 11 points. That's not one case manager's judgment. That's a spreadsheet built to produce a number, and Whitney read the number the way she was trained to. I looked at her then, and I meant what I said next. I'm not here to end your career, Whitney. You didn't design that protocol. You inherited it, and you used it exactly as intended, and that is precisely the problem, and it stops today. Tab 3, and this was the one meant only for the 2 people across from me. This is a summary of financial activity over the last 6 weeks. A realtor's valuation request on my house, filed 19 days after my diagnosis. A $400 consultation with an estate attorney, filed 1 week after my diagnosis. 2 SUV leases. A home equity draw. I am not showing you this to humiliate you. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I'm showing you this so that when you tell me, later, that you only wanted what was best for me, we can both remember that the paperwork moved faster than the concern did. The room was very quiet. Vanessa spoke first, and her voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard since her own mother's funeral, 22 years ago. We didn't, Eleanor, we didn't want you to die. We wanted to stop watching you suffer through something that might not even work, and then be gone anyway, and have spent everything getting there. That's what happened to my dad. That's what happened to my whole family. I watched my mother sign the house away for 4 extra months of a man who never opened his eyes again. I didn't want that to be you. I didn't want that to be us. I let that land, because it was true, and because pretending it wasn't true would have made everything after it a performance instead of a reckoning. I understand that fear, I said. I'd buried a husband. I know what it costs, in every sense, to watch someone decline. But Vanessa, you never asked me. In 6 weeks, nobody in this family asked me what I wanted for my own life. You asked a realtor. You asked an estate attorney. You asked a case manager with a spreadsheet. You never once asked me. Bradley, to his very small credit, was crying by then, the kind of crying a grown man does when he's ashamed rather than sad, hands pressed flat against his face. I should have asked you, he said, into his hands. I know I should have asked you. I let Vanessa carry it because I didn't want to be the one who said the wrong thing. You didn't say the wrong thing, Bradley, I said. You didn't say anything at all. For 11 seconds, in that lounge, you said nothing, and I counted every one of them. It was Dr. Reyes who broke the silence that followed, and I hadn't planned for this part, which is exactly why it mattered. For what it's worth, he said quietly, to the whole room, I've worked with Mrs. Voss's cardiac case for 6 weeks now without knowing any of this history. She asked harder questions about her own recovery odds than most surgeons do. If this were my mother, I'd schedule the valve replacement tomorrow morning. Whitney's director finally spoke, visibly rattled. Mrs. Reyes, Mrs. Voss, I'm so sorry. This protocol will be under full review by end of week. I take responsibility for how it was implemented under my department. I nodded. Thank you. I'd like the review to include patient advocates outside the cost-efficiency consultants who built it in the first place. People who've actually sat in a lounge and been sorted by a color. The valve replacement happened 11 days later. Dr. Reyes performed it himself. For hours, no complications, and I woke up in a recovery room with Caleb holding my hand and Sandra asleep in the chair beside him, portfolio still tucked under her arm like she thought someone might try to steal it. Whitney Pierce kept her job. I want to be clear about that, because I know some of you watching wanted her fired, and I understand the instinct, but she wasn't the disease. She was a symptom of one. The protocol was rebuilt from the ground up over the following 2 months, with a mandatory second clinical opinion, from a physician, not a spreadsheet, required before any comfort care redirection conversation happens with a family. We call it, informally, inside Meridian now, the Voss Review. I didn't ask for that name. Sandra put it on the paperwork before I could object, and by the time I noticed, it had already stuck. Vanessa and I are not close. I want to be honest about that, because these stories like to end in a neat bow, and this one hasn't, entirely. She apologized, and I believe the apology was real in the moment she gave it, but old fears don't dissolve because one conversation named them out loud. We are civil. She calls before visiting now, which she never used to do, and I think that small courtesy is the most honest form of respect she currently has available to give me, and I've decided to accept it as enough, for now. Bradley has changed more, in the quieter, slower way that men like him sometimes do. He calls on Sundays, just to talk, no agenda, no lounge outside a hospital room, no spreadsheet in his voice. 2 weeks ago he brought me a mixing bowl, the same kind I was reaching for the day I fainted, because he remembered, unprompted, and set it on my counter without a word about the past. Caleb switched his rotation focus to geriatric cardiac care. He told me, half joking, that he wants to make sure nobody ever gets scored yellow going on red again without someone in the room asking the harder question first. I don't think it was entirely a joke. I sold my house, in the end, not because Vanessa pushed for it, but because I chose to, on my own timeline, into a smaller place with a garden Walter would have liked, near the clinic I still quietly help run. I kept the portfolio. It sits on a shelf in my new study, navy leather, corner soft, and some mornings I take it down just to touch the deed with my own maiden name on it, the name that let me hear the truth before anyone realized I could. People ask me, now, whether I forgive them. I tell them forgiveness isn't a door that swings open once and stays that way. It's a room you walk back into, sometimes daily, and decide again whether you're willing to sit down. Some days I sit down easily. Some days I don't, and that's allowed too. Here's what I know, 71 years and one repaired heart into this life: love your family, help them when you can, show up for them without being asked twice. But never let anyone, not a case manager with a spreadsheet, not a child frightened by his own inaction, not even someone as loved as a daughter-in-law who buried her own father too young, decide your worth for you while you're still in the room to speak for yourself. Numbers don't lie. People do, sometimes to themselves before they ever lie to you.